Hi everyone, Peter here from Flow High Performance, and in this video we will cover how to create a strength training program and how it can be periodized for long-term strength gains. First, let's explore what exactly strength is. Strength is simply how much weight can be lifted in a certain exercise for one rep. It needs to be understood that strength is specific to the exercise, so getting stronger at one exercise doesn't necessarily mean that you have become stronger at another exercise. However, the more similar two exercises are, the more transfer they will have between each other. Let's now explore what adaptations can be made which contribute to strength gains. The first is technique improvements. As a trainee practices an exercise regularly, they can become biomechanically more efficient at the lift. For example, as a trainee practices a back squat, they learn how to brace their trunk, find the best stance width for their anatomy, and squat with minimal lateral knee movement. All of these technical factors contribute to making the lift more biomechanically efficient by avoiding force leakage through unnecessary movements. The next adaptation that contributes to strength development is neural efficiency. This refers to how much force can be produced by the prime movers of the lift in a specific motor pattern. This comes down to the ability to recruit all muscle fibers of the prime movers in a coordinated manner. Neural efficiency once again is specific to the exercise and load, so this is best trained using heavy loads with the exercise you are trying to get stronger at. And the last primary adaptation that contributes to strength gains is muscle size. If a trainee can increase the size of the prime movers of a particular lift, then they simply have more muscle tissue that can contribute to force production. For example, if a trainee increases the size of their chest, triceps, and delt muscles, with all other factors being equal, they have more muscle tissue to contribute to force output and will be stronger at an exercise like the bench press. Muscle growth is maximized using higher volumes with higher rep ranges of around 6 to 20. Now that we have established the fundamentals of strength training, let's explore how we can create a microcycle of training for maximal strength. First, we need to establish the strength goals for the program. Because strength is highly specific, we need to select the exact exercises that we want to become stronger at. For this example, let's say the trainee wants to improve their maximal strength in the squat and bench press while simultaneously achieving full body hypertrophy. Now we need to consider frequency. So how many times per week will the trainee be lifting? For this example, let's say the trainee will be lifting 4 times per week using an upper-lower split. So days 1 and 3 will focus on the bench press, while days 2 and 4 will focus on the back squat. Next, let's implement exercises for each training session. We have 2 categories of exercises that will be implemented into our program. These are our strength lifts that we are aiming to get stronger at, and accessory lifts, which are there to provide additional volume for muscle growth. These accessory lifts will both assist the strength lifts and also provide hypertrophy adaptations for the rest of the body that isn't trained during the primary strength lifts. So as we already mentioned, this program will use the bench press and back squat as the primary strength lifts. So the bench press will be performed on days 1 and 3, and the back squat will be performed on days 2 and 4. Next, we will need to select accessory lifts. Accessory lifts have one primary goal. This is to provide muscle growth of the relevant prime movers and other muscles the trainee wants to grow. One important consideration to make when selecting accessory lifts for strength training is the impact on the joints. Heavy strength training is generally quite taxing on the joints, so we want accessory lifts to be as joint friendly as possible. Taking this into consideration, we have implemented the following exercises for this example. For the upper body sessions, we have implemented the lat pull down, cable flies, seated row, triceps push down, and dumbbell curls. This uses fairly joint friendly exercises to target the back and biceps since they won't be trained much from the strength lifts, and also some isolated chest and tricep work to assist muscle growth for the bench press. For the lower body sessions, we have implemented the following accessory exercises: weighted back extensions, belt squats, and calf raises. These exercises allow additional volume for the hamstrings and calves, which won't get much stimulus from the back squat, and additional volume for the quads. These exercises also avoid additional spinal loading that may be an issue from heavy back squats. So we now have a basic weekly structure in place. Before we plan out a detailed mesocycle of training, let's first have a look at how strength training can be periodized over time. We need to do this first because the periodization plan will determine how the mesocycle will be programmed. The first consideration when periodizing strength training is time to peak. This simply refers to when the trainee aims to be at their strongest. We can't be in peak condition all year round, so we need to establish when exactly we want to perform at our best. We need to understand this in advance so we can periodize training to peak at this specific time. For this example, let's use a time frame of 16 weeks. So this trainee aims to be at their peak strength for the bench press and back squat in 16 weeks time. To make this 16-week period easier to program and manage fatigue, we can break this time frame up into blocks. For this example, let's break the 16-week cycle into 4 blocks of 4 weeks each. Let's now explore how volume and intensity can be manipulated over the 16 weeks to reach peak condition. For strength training, we can define volume as a number of sets performed per week of the particular strength lifts, and intensity as the load lifted relative to the trainee's 1RM. We probably want to follow a similar general periodization scheme to the one seen in this graph. In the first half of the training cycle, we want to emphasize hypertrophy adaptations by using higher volumes with lower intensities. This will allow a solid foundation of muscle mass to be built, which will then enhance maximal strength when specific neural adaptations are trained. Then in the second half of the cycle, we want to emphasize specific neural adaptations to maximize specific strength. This is achieved by using lower volumes and higher intensities to reduce accumulated fatigue and perform the most specific training. Now that we have established the general periodization model of our training cycle, we can plan the details of each mesocycle. First, we need to establish the basic mesocycle structure. As we have already established, each mesocycle will be 4 weeks long. So for this example, the first week will be a deload, where volume will be lower to reduce accumulated fatigue from each previous mesocycle. The following 3 weeks will then be regular overloading training with the goal of promoting training adaptations. The first block of the training cycle may look something like this. The goal of this block is to slowly accumulate volume to promote hypertrophy adaptations. As we can see here, we have implemented the exercises that we previously selected. First, let's implement the programming variables for the strength lifts. As we can see here, we've prescribed the volume for each lift. The block starts with 1 set of each exercise as an introduction week, then each week the sets increase by 1 up to a total of 4 sets per exercise for each session. Next, we need to implement load. Because we are trying to emphasize hypertrophy adaptations in this block, we want the trainee to lift somewhere in the 6 to 10 rep range. So here we have implemented a load of 75% of their previous 1RM, which should allow the trainee to lift somewhere in the appropriate rep range. Next, we have prescribed the proximity to failure using reps in reserve. For each set of each lift, the trainee will leave 1 to 2 reps in reserve. This is to ensure that the trainee is training hard enough, but not pushing to complete failure. Now we can start to program the accessory lifts. As we can see here, 3 to 4 sets of each exercise will be performed with a deload week using less volume. The loads used for the accessory exercises don't matter to any significant extent as long as they allow the trainee to lift somewhere in the 6 to 20 rep range. As we can see here, appropriate loads have been implemented. And lastly, each set will be taken to a close proximity to failure. Compound lifts use an RAR of 1 to 2, while isolation lifts use a 0 to 1 RAR. The next block of training has a pure goal of emphasizing muscle hypertrophy. We have already gone through an accumulation phase where volume has increased. Now the trainee can train with higher volumes to provide the appropriate hypertrophy stimulus. As we can see here, the exercises have remained exactly the same, only the training variables will differ slightly. For the strength lifts, all variables have remained the same, except the volume is now higher than the previous block. As we can see here, 4 sets of each exercise has been implemented on each day, except for the deload week. Depending on how the trainee is responding to training, the load may also be able to be increased by around 5% if performance has been improving significantly. However, we still want to work within the 6 to 10 rep range, so this should only be implemented if the trainee can do so. The variables for the accessory lifts have remained exactly the same, as their goal is simply to provide hypertrophy adaptations using high volumes in the 6 to 20 rep range. The third block will follow an intensification progression, where the goal is to start emphasizing neural adaptations by lifting heavier loads. We also want to maintain a reasonable level of volume to maintain or even continue providing some hypertrophy adaptations. As we can see here, the exercises are the same as the previous 2 blocks. For the strength lifts, the volume has been reduced by 1 set for each exercise per session. This is because the loads will now be heavier, which is more stressful on the joints, so less volume is required to avoid injury. The loads used are now heavier and increase each week by 2.5%. As we can see here, the loads start at 80% and increase up to 87.5% by week 4. At this point, the trainee can use back-off sets instead of straight sets if they prefer. This means that only the top set can use the prescribed load and the other sets can be reduced by 5 to 10% load and performed with higher rep ranges. The RIR is still prescribed at 1 to 2 to ensure a high effort, but we don't want to take each set to complete failure. And once again, the accessory lifts remain the same to continue to provide hypertrophy adaptations. And the final block of the training cycle aims to peak the trainee for maximal strength. So at the end of this block, the trainee will max out and attempt a new 1RM. This block aims to maximize neural adaptations while reducing fatigue accumulation, so the trainee is in the freshest state possible to perform at their best. The exercises have remained the same as the previous 3 blocks to keep things consistent. The volume is much lower in this training block and actually reduces from week 2 to week 4. This is once again to reduce fatigue so that the trainee is in a fresh state to maximize strength. The loads used here undulate between sessions. The first 2 sessions of the week use slightly lighter loads, and the last 2 sessions of the week use heavier loads. This is because the trainee will test their strength in the last 2 days of the block. The reps in reserve have been prescribed as 0 to 1 in this block, as we want the trainee to push harder with these heavier loads. This will get them more efficient at lifting heavier loads at slow velocities. It also gives the trainee a more accurate indication of where their strength is at, so they can start to get an idea of their true strength and what they will be able to lift when they max out. And the accessory lifts have now remained the same apart from the volume. The volume is overall lower and is especially low in week 4. This is because we still want to perform accessory lifts to ensure we don't reduce muscle mass, but we don't want high volumes as this may contribute to fatigue and mask performance. Thanks for watching, and hopefully you got something out of this video. Remember to subscribe if you haven't already.